Well, granted, reports of unusual events must be more carefully examined than reports of ordinary ones. But it is methodologically fallacious to correlate the unusualness of an event with the unreliability of a report concerning it.
So
rockets go up, and so we know the Challenger, in 1986 didn't explode because a good majority of time rockets don't explode. And so we know that it didn't explode because the uniformity of rockets is to go up and come back down. So the Challenger disaster never happened, right? I mean, that's what we're saying here.
Right. So his problem here, his issue is this, the fallacious idea that, well, it's unusual and therefore that means that the report is unreliable.
Right.
And that just doesn't correlate, right? Just because it's unusual doesn't mean the report is unreliable. Mm-hmm. And so, that's his worry here. All right, and he tells us likewise there's a Life magazine reported an extremely improbable event. Life magazine, go figure. He says this one conceivably in a religious context.
Oh no, even worse.
For those, right? And so he says, and this is for those who regard such context as particularly problematic. So what was the event? Well, on March 1st, 1950, all 15 members of a church choir arrived late for choir rehearsal scheduled for 7:15. They were all late. Right?
All 15 people. Wow.
Yeah. And they all had distinct reasons for being late, right? One's car failed to start and so forth, right? So all 15 were late and they didn't make it to church on time. That church building, the Life magazine reported, exploded at 7:25 p.m. And their lateness prevented any lives from being lost, right? And so with the probability of these separate events coincidentally, being as low as about 1 in a million, one scholar argues Hume's argument might force him to reject the magazine's testimony.
Right.
Couldn't be true because it's too unusual, right? Especially if it's in a religious context, right? Clearly, that kind of stuff can't happen. Sorry, Life. Right?
Exactly. Yeah, so they were all concluding with each other to blow up the church building. They really didn't want to go to choir practice anymore.
One way to get out of it, right?
Yep, exactly.
So he says, the point is that rare events do happen, and excluding them based on probability will require the exclusion of concrete evidence supporting them. Right?
Yeah. Boy, I wonder if there's a way to classify and quantify events based on probability.
Yeah, how about the Bayes theorem or
Oh,
something?
yeah. There's that whole thing. Yeah. Well, against such objections, Hume's real argument may involve not the improbability of a particular event, but of a particular kind of event. Thus, some people reasonably counter the analogy of the lottery by pointing out that an event of this kind, someone winning, is assured, whereas events like miracles are improbable. Unfortunately, while the issue may in fact be kinds of events rather than specific events, the counter-argument against miracles presupposes what it claims to prove, right? Since miracles are improbable only on non-theistic premises, right? So, we know eventually there could be the potential of a lottery winner. So you can't talk about the improbability of one person winning, but we know that miracles never happen because God doesn't exist. But okay, we're saying God does exist, and evidence for him is miracles. And so if we're never allowed to get off the ground with making our assertion, then when you say, well, provide me evidence of a miracle, well, you're not letting me because you're immediately saying, well, we know miracles can't happen because God doesn't exist. Okay, that's the thing in question. That's what we're talking about. Moreover, whereas mere anomalies are unexpected is precisely theistic premise that allows us to anticipate the possibility of some miracles in a theistic context. Right. So the dividing of the Red Sea, let's even assume that it happened. Well, we just know that a wind really, really strong allowed for the people to cross. And then it just so happened that wind stopped at just the right time to cover the armies of the Egyptians. And it allowed the Israelites to escape. Well, OK, that's perfectly within that premise. Right. So we would say that's highly, highly unlikely to be the case. But if your non-theistic presuppositions come into play, that's your only type of ability to have an answer for why that happens. But if you're theistic, if you have the belief in God, you can have miracles occur within the context of history, of God's providence. And so which one is more likely to be the case, that a divine wind occurred, or that just it so happened that the normal course of wind events caused all these people to go across and then to cover it up when their enemies approached? Well, it would seem that you have to have more blind faith in the non-theistic approach than in the theistic approach there.
Now, this last portion here, he kind of doubles down on this theistic factor that we have just talked about. And he says analogies with lotteries are relevant only for epistemic reasons. But the real issue is that a theistic context, if not ruled out, allows for the possibility of miracles. And that's the point you were making earlier, right? Mm-hmm. And multiple well-attested miracle claims in that context makes them probable. Right. He gives an example of the philosopher Richard Pertil. He emphasizes unusual events might even be expected in the right context, right? In a theological, atheistic context. He says, we do not expect, for instance, athletic world records to be broken regularly, right? But we might expect them to occur at times at the Olympics. There's the context, right? And so Pertel then argues that while Jesus' resurrection makes no sense as a random event, it fits with the context of his life and teaching, which it climaxes. And so we have to look at the context, and if there's a theistic context, then that, again, increases the probability that the event happened, right? Just like if we're talking about somebody breaking a world record, well, in the Olympic context, that increases the probability of the event happening. And so we have to take into account the context when we're examining these various claims. So, it's not just, experience, right? Uniform experience. And it's not just, unreliable witnesses, but we also need to look at the context of the event as well when we're considering what actually happened.
Yeah, and I think that's lost sometimes in both sides trying to make their points, is that, if everything's going along, if Jesus is teaching, all of a sudden he's grabbed by the Romans and crucified on a cross and buried and resurrected, and he pops out and everyone's like, whoa, no one was expecting it, and Jesus is also surprised. That might add a little bit of more doubt into it. But if Jesus is saying, like, hey, in 3 days, if you kill me, I will raise up this temple, and if there's a historical context of entire 40 books of an Old Testament talking about all these miracles that will come to pass, and this precipice of a person who will usher in the kingdom of God, and if people are looking back to it and pointing to this being the culmination of human history, if this is surrounding it, that adds way more weight to something like the resurrection happening than just Jesus rising from the dead all of a sudden, poof, and everyone's shocked, including him, and they just go on with their life. But no, I mean, things change as a result of it, and there's even though not everyone was expecting it or believing it, the fact that people are writing about it, especially after the fact, and saying, like, here's points where everyone should have known, and here's him saying these particular things that show that he's talking about his resurrection, that just adds more to it, instead of just the someone being Usain Bolt's world record in a friendly competition at a picnic, right? So that would be even more surprising in that case. But